My name is Dan Watson. I'm not a town resident. I live in Averly in Talbot County. This has to do with both aspects of the proposed annexation, both the zoning and the annexation itself. But I'm the individual who was the first to arrive at the scene Saturday morning a week ago of a collision at the intersection of Marlborough Road and 33. And I was 200 yards probably behind the vehicle on 33 that was, or behind the point of the accident, saw the spin out, and it was not a happy sight. This was not a crowded condition. It was a Saturday morning, not a lot of traffic, but we know traffic will only build there. And when I got out of the vehicle and walked up to that accident scene, and with 911 on my cell phone, I didn't know if I was going to see death and blood or something minor, and it was mighty close to the former. The two vehicles collided engine to engine. Both cars were totaled. There was a gentleman elderly gentleman who was seriously hurt. Had it been another half a second, I think it would have literally been a T-bone, in which case the driver coming out of Marlborough Road to get into Easton Village would have been the driver's side. He would have been T-boned by a young woman driving a vehicle at that point. So it just underscores what everyone on the council and everyone in this county knows, which is these intersections at 33, 322, 33, and Marlborough Road are critical because they are the point of convergence of an awful lot of traffic. It seems to me it makes no sense to compound that by doing an annexation today that permits a increase in growth of traffic before such time as the Easton Village is built out, the shopping area is built out, the issues surrounding the possibility of a traffic light and the when and where and why of that are all resolved. There's no urgency to this. I'm also would opine that I'm a former real estate developer of 40 years, and it is the case, in my opinion, that the benefit of an immediate annexation inures not at all to the benefit of the citizens of the town. And I'm not a town resident myself, but it inures only to the property owner who wants to enhance the value of his property for selling it, notwithstanding the fact that the council, from everything that I've read and watched, rightly imposed a few conditions, including the access road to deal with aspects of the very traffic issue that I first rose to address. And there's no reason to move forward with that and to waive that condition. The fact that the developer, and I've been a developer in the past, the developer is having difficulties resolving that problem, but to be not the responsibility of the county to respond to, the town council or the town to respond to, but the responsibility of the developer, given that the council's conditions were well conceived and well thought out at the outset. Thank you very much.
I'm James Brennan. I live at 28330 Village Lake Way, Easton. I guess I'm a little unclear, but let me just say what my opinion would be, which is that, as we stated last time, and as I heard probably 3 dozen of my fellow citizens state in the previous three zoning meetings and 2 council meetings, the 3 requirements that council laid out for the annexation of the property to be approved were perfectly reasonable, perfectly valid, and I think they correctly and knowledgeably protect the interests of the citizens of this community. To roll back on any of them seems inappropriate and seems like some sort of gift to someone who is not a resident, and that's really disappointing to me as a resident. I don't hear that anything has changed that improves the annexation. I think we've been all through the record in terms of the what would be gained by having more land annexed for commercial development. I think the 5-year wait is appropriate. I think the access road requirement is appropriate, and the zoning that you laid out as far as the zoning limitation was absolutely appropriate. I haven't heard anything that changed that opinion. So I guess that's what I'd like to remind you, that I think that is the That's certainly my opinion, and I have not heard that opinion differ from anybody who's come from this side of the chambers to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm getting ready to close this public hearing, and then we're going to hear the consensus of the council. So one last go. Okay. This public hearing is closed. I'm going to ask the council for a consensus both on we'll start with the annexation resolution, because if that fails, with the zoning is moot. But I'm going to ask Sharon to just go over quickly the kind of recap the zoning conundrum, if that's the right word for it. It's definitely confusing. If you could sum that up for us, Sharon, before I ask the council to speak.
Sure. And the documents before you are what was originally proposed by the applicant. They have not been modified to include the conditions that you all had talked about when you did your original consensus. And that's because at this point, since they're unable to get the access road, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of language about that access road until we see if the council's willing to annex without that access road, or with some language about it, but it happening in the future as opposed to something happening now. So the ordinance before you for zoning still has the original request of general commercial as well. But there are, options that will just require us to amend those documents before you would pass them if you choose to go that route. It seems, based on the previous consensus of the council, that the general commercial for both properties was not something that you all were interested in. You expressed an interest in the business commercial for the properties. Mr. Smith indicated that the Route 33 parcels, they would not be willing to accept that since they are already zoned commercially in the county, that they would withdraw their properties from the annexation if that were to occur. And so if that occurs, I think we, as Mr. Showalter mentioned at your last meeting, it would require re-advertising because the description of the property that's being annexed would change. And so there have been cases before where it said that would require re-advertising and having another public hearing. But it's certainly something that can be done. It's just, it requires some process to do that. In terms of if you did decide to annex, the zoning options you have available, or at least what I anticipate, or ones that you might consider. If you were interested in just applying the business commercial to the standard FUC property and looking at your options for the Route 33 property, the applicant originally requested the town's general commercial district. That is similar but not identical to the county zoning that's already in place. There are a few uses that are different, so it still would require a waiver from the county in order to put that zoning on the property. One thing I didn't think of earlier when I emailed all of you was another option is to apply limited commercial to that property. And I don't know whether that's something that the applicants would be willing to do or not. So that's something that you would need some input from. The applicants did request at one point that the county zoning remain in place on either one or both of the properties. That is something you could do. And certainly if a zoning waiver is not granted, that is something that happens automatically for that 5-year period. It's not a good long-term solution. I don't think the town, we have never had to implement county zoning on town property. And while the zoning aspects aren't that difficult, there's some procedural aspects that would be if development were to occur under those standards. For example, the county has a whole tax process in their zoning ordinance, which the town doesn't even have. So the processes and procedures would be a little bit difficult to implement with county zoning. Not necessarily impossible to do, but it would require some different procedures than we're used to in the town. With the 5-year no development, that might not be that big an issue because during that 5-year period, if nothing major were to happen on that property anyway, having county zoning on it might not be as big a deal. So those are some of the options if you did choose to annex, would be that zoning ordinance would need to be amended. I assume, it seems like the general commercial for both is not something the council wants to do. So it's just a matter of giving some direction on what the council does want to do if you wanted to annex, so that we could modify the documents accordingly.
Well, all of that may or may not come into play depending on how the council feels about the annexation, and I'll speak first to that. My position has not changed through the multiple public hearings and the testimony I've heard. I still think it is imperative that that access road is in place before annexation is agreed to, and without it, I'm not willing to support the annexation. I do want to reiterate, though, I feel these properties belong in the town of Easton, and I think they're perfect for a small area plan that would enhance the commercial viability of that area, but without that access road, and I give all credit to the applicant. I know they've tried very hard to get that in place, and I don't want to diminish the effort they made, but without that legally binding in place, I'm not willing to support the annexation.
Well, I concur. We had 3 criteria that needed to be met. They haven't been met, and therefore I couldn't support the annexation.
Mr. Lesher?
I stand by where I did before, although with perhaps a bit of nuance on this. I see the access road as absolutely required for this, but with a 5-year hold on development, of course, the road would not need to be built immediately. In fact, it wouldn't need to be built until that time when any development took place on this. And I think that could be accommodated with an annexation agreement, conditional on when those permissions are secured, whether they're secured by the applicant or whether they're secured by the town. And I'd be perfectly comfortable moving forward with all 3 conditions in place, and that contingency for the access road as part of it.
So, just to clarify, both you and Mr. Silverstein's remarks, all 3 aspects, you're both in favor of the BC zoning?
The BC zoning, the 5-year hold, and the access road, but with an annexation agreement that would require that the access road be built at the time when the permission is obtained by either the applicant or the town for the right-of-way. It would be timed on. I think it could be timed on that. This is absolutely possible to obtain this. But yes, it would be contingent on requiring that permit, on obtaining that permission.
And I didn't clarify my, I'm not insistent on the BC zoning. As I said at our first public hearing, again, the road is an imperative with me, but I would not object to the county zoning coming in. I just don't feel that, especially with the 5-year hold on development, I don't think the Orion property is going to get redeveloped as an industrial site. I think it's somewhat unlikely anyway. I think it will get redeveloped as a PUD eventually, and that's going to involve a very public process. So I'm not insistent on the BC zoning, but again, I am insistent on the road.
Well, I concur with the rest of you. I just don't see how this could go forward without an access road. It's a terrible location. It increased the danger of our citizens more than I think is necessary. I, like you, in the zoning, I'd probably follow with you on that. The 5-year, I think, is important, but clearly the access is the most important to me.
And I mean, I agree. I think I'm most conflicted about the road and the fact that the 2 parties were not able to come to a consensus that Remco Properties is basically holding this property hostage almost due to their unwillingness to cooperate. And I feel that that's unfortunate, you know, to Fusey property. I wish there was an easier, I do feel adamant that that road needs to be there, but I wish there was an easier way of negotiating between those two properties. I just feel that they're willing to come to the table, and there hasn't been much, as my opinion, there hasn't been much cooperation from the other side. And until Remco is willing to cooperate with them, this project isn't going to go forward with that road, if we make that road a condition of annexation.
I have that same confidence that there's a way forward for this, and that's why I'm suggesting that be enshrined in an annexation agreement, so that we can put this to bed. We don't need to send the applicant away for an indefinite period, but that this would be essentially hanging out there as a contingency for, or as an option, as a condition, such that when that condition is fulfilled, this can all move forward.
Then what is Remco's role in this, I guess, is how does this diminish their control of the situation?
It doesn't change anything for Remco, and they're simply the party that would ultimately need to grant to either the town or the applicant the right of way. And at some point, something's going to give. That's going to come around. Mm-hmm. And we can ensure that this whole thing can move forward when those conditions are met.
And Megan, your thoughts on the zoning recommendations
I don't feel it should come in with county zoning. I feel it needs to come in with town zoning.
with the Planning Commission's recommendation of BC? Okay. So Sharon, the way I see this is regardless of the avenue that Pete's comments may provide, you still have the consensus of the council insistent on the BC zoning, which at least part of the application properties are not willing to accept. So unless I'm reading this incorrectly, this is the consensus of the council is that this annexation is going to be denied. And that's how your the resolution should be revised.
We wouldn't necessarily need to revise the resolution. You could just vote it no tonight.
Okay.
And that would, you know, you're saying no, so we don't, it's not something where you have to have findings of fact that support why you're saying no, like sometimes we have with zoning decisions. For an annexation, you could just vote on the resolution before you and vote no.
That we would be voting no on, on the resolution or on the ordinance?
Well, when you vote no on the resolution, there's no need for the ordinance because you're not applying zoning to any property that's been annexed, so the ordinance becomes moot once you're not annexing the property.
But if we move forward with the resolution, with an annexation agreement, then
we need to revise that.
Then it would need to be re-advertised and such.
Right. It sounded to me like there were 3 votes no without an access road up front.
I make a motion, resolution number is it 6064, to deny the request.
I'll move to approve the annexation resolution.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Resolution number 6064 has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Ruff, would you call the roll?
Mr. Silverstein?
Before we vote, are we voting? Make sure I'm clear.
No would be denying the annexation.
Okay, no.
Mr. Lasher?
Aye.
Mr. Engel?
Oh,
Mrs. Cook?
No.
President Ford?
No.